Have you ever wondered why a man's words can slip past your defenses, entering not just your ears but your very bones, as if they were written for you alone? There are moments when his tongue becomes the doorway to his unconscious, revealing more than he intends. And in those moments, if you listen with the precision of a woman rooted in her own worth, you will hear the trembling secret: obsession, not the shallow infatuation of a boy chasing a thrill, but the archetypal hunger of a man's psyche, when it believes it has found what it cannot control. Carl Jung once observed that the unconscious speaks in symbols, projections, and slips of the tongue. A man may never admit outright that he is consumed by you, but his words betray the truth. They emerge unpolished, carrying the shadow of his deeper longing. And if he says certain things, he is not merely speaking casually, he is exposing the fracture in his armor. He is showing you where his ego ends and his hidden desire begins. Consider the first type of phrase, the one that tries to claim your time, when a man says, "Where were you?" with an edge that is too sharp, or "Why didn't you answer?" with a tone that carries more weight than the situation deserves. He is not asking about your location. He is wrestling with absence itself. He fears the void you create when you step away. Jung would call this the anima projection, the feminine within him that he cannot master, the part of his soul that both terrifies and completes him. In this subtle interrogation, he reveals his dependence. His words sound like concern, but beneath them lies the terror of losing the source of his psychic energy. And here's where you must notice the deeper pattern. A man who is balanced in himself respects the ebb and flow of another's freedom. He knows that absence is natural, that silence is a form of rest. But the man who is obsessed cannot abide it. Your silence to him feels like death. Your distance awakens his shadow, that primitive fear of abandonment carved into his nervous system long before he met you. He clings to you with questions because he clings to life itself. And you, hearing those words, must ask yourself, are you a woman who feeds that hunger, or one who recognizes it as his burden to confront? Then there are the words of comparison, the veiled statements that place you above all others. He might say, "No one has ever made me feel this way," or "I've never met someone like you." At first, these phrases feel flattering, almost intoxicating. They are designed to pierce your defenses, to make you believe you have awakened something in him no other woman could. But listen carefully. These words are not about you. They are about the archetype you represent in his inner world. To him, you are not simply a woman. You are a mirror of his anima, the goddess he chases in every dream. The eternal feminine that Jung described as both muse and torment. When he speaks in absolutes, what he reveals is not love, but projection. He has lifted you out of the realm of the human and placed you onto the stage of his inner mythology. An obsession lives in this act of worship, because when a man elevates you to divine status, he no longer sees you clearly. He sees his reflection shimmering in your outline. And this blindness, though romantic in appearance, is dangerous. For sooner or later, every goddess must step down from the pedestal. And when she does, the obsessed man feels betrayed, not by her actions, but by the collapse of his own fantasy. Finally, there are the words of possession, the phrases that slip out when his ego can no longer restrain the primal instinct. He might say, "You're mine," whether playfully or with hidden gravity. He might whisper, "I can't stand the thought of you with someone else." These are not just declarations of desire, they are echoes of the ancient masculine drive to control what he fears losing. To a Jungian eye, this is the shadow of obsession, the instinct to bind, to own, to reduce the mystery of the feminine to something manageable. And yet, paradoxically, the more he tries to possess, the more the mystery slips away. For the true feminine cannot be owned, only honored. The Stoics knew this well. Epictetus reminded us that what is external cannot belong to us. That attachment to what we cannot govern is the root of suffering. So when a man's words bend toward possession, what he is truly revealing is his suffering. His ego rages against the truth, that your freedom is the very thing that makes you magnetic. This is the paradox every woman must recognize. Obsession may sound like love, but it is rooted in fear. It may look like devotion, but it is driven by the shadow's refusal to let go. And when you hear these words, when you recognize their undertone, you must decide whether you will be consumed by his projections or stand apart as the mirror that forces him to confront himself. Because ultimately, obsession is not about you, it is about him, yet the power lies in your awareness. To see his words for what they truly are is to step outside the spell and remember, you are not the reflection of his unconscious. You are the embodiment of your own. The man obsessed does not realize that his language is a confession. Each phrase that escapes him is not merely a statement, but a symptom. The unconscious presses through his speech like cracks in a mask, and if you listen with sharpened ears, you will hear the tremor of his dependency. Obsession, unlike love, does not nourish, it consumes. It does not expand the soul, it contracts it, binding it in chains of fear and longing. And when he speaks in those three archetypal ways, through questions of your absence, through comparisons that elevate you above all others, and through declarations of possession, he is telling you less about you and more about himself. He is revealing the imbalance within, the storm between his ego and his shadow. Jung taught that every man carries the image of the feminine within him. The The anima, that eternal figure who haunts his dreams and stirs his passions. When a man has not integrated this aspect, he projects it onto the women around him. Suddenly, you are not merely a woman. You are his dream, his savior, his downfall. His words of obsession are simply the sound of that projection spilling out, clumsy and desperate. He sees you, but not clearly. What he truly sees is his own unconscious dancing in your eyes. And when this happens, you must ask yourself, do you want to be a mirror for his unfinished work? Or do you want to be a woman who demands that he finish it? The danger lies in how easily obsession can disguise itself as devotion. To the untrained heart, the man who says I can't live without you sounds romantic, almost heroic. But listen deeper. In truth, he is saying he cannot live with himself. His inner world is hollow, and he is begging you to fill it. This is not love, it is dependency. And dependency is the enemy of true connection. For real love arises when two whole beings meet, not when one seeks to consume the other to patch the cracks in his soul. This is why your awareness is your shield. A woman who understands the psychology of obsession cannot be fooled by the glitter of words. She hears the shadow beneath them. She recognizes the man who has not done his inner work, the one who would rather imprison the feminine than bow to its mystery. When he says, "No one has ever made me feel this way," she knows it is not her power that enslaves him, but his refusal to confront his inner anima. When he says, "You're mine," she knows that what he fears most is freedom, hers and his own. And when he demands, "Where were you?" she knows that his question is not about her absence, but about his emptiness. Yet there is also a strange beauty in this knowledge. To see obsession for what it is does not make you cynical, it makes you sovereign. You no longer mistake control for affection, projection for admiration, possession for love. You rise above the spell and understand that his words, though cloaked in intensity, are simply signals of where he is on his path toward individuation. Jung would remind us that every projection is a cry for integration. When he is obsessed with you, he is, in truth, obsessed with the part of himself he cannot yet claim. And here, the feminine power shines brightest. Not in feeding the obsession, not in surrendering your freedom for his comfort, but in standing as the mirror he cannot ignore. For when a man is confronted with a woman who will not bend to his possession, who will not collapse under his comparisons, who will not be interrogated into justifying her freedom, he is forced to turn inward. He must face his shadow, and perhaps, for the first time, he meets himself. The Stoics would call this discipline of detachment, to see clearly what belongs to you and what does not. Seneca wrote that we suffer more in imagination than in reality, and this is true for the man who obsesses. He suffers not from you, but from his fantasies about you. He clings to what is imagined, and in doing so, he loses the reality of who you are. And if you mistake his suffering for devotion, you may bind yourself to his storm. But if you see it with clear eyes, you remain free. So the question becomes, when you hear these words, will you let them weave a net around your spirit, or will you recognize them as the echoes of a man wrestling with himself? A woman who knows her worth listens differently. She hears not only what is said, but what is revealed. She knows that obsession is not proof of love, but proof of unresolved shadow. And she does not confuse intensity with intimacy. To stand in this awareness is to step into a rare kind of feminine power, the power that does not chase, does not plead, does not shrink, but simply witnesses with clarity. It is the kind of power that shakes a man's very core, because it refuses to be possessed. And in that refusal, he either crumbles into his own illusions, or he rises to meet you as an equal. Obsession, when stripped bare, is nothing more than a man at war with his own unconscious. His words, though directed at you, are fragments of this inner battle. They are the cries of the ego trying to contain what it cannot control, the mysterious, untamable feminine that stirs his depths. Jung described this tension as the meeting point of shadow and light, where the masculine psyche wrestles with its hidden anima, and when you stand before him, radiant and unyielding, he projects that anima onto you, desperate to grasp what is in fact an inner figure, not an outer possession. This is why his language often betrays him. It carries too much weight, too much heat, for the moment in which it is spoken. A casual absence feels to him like abandonment. Your simple presence feels like divinity. The imbalance is not in you, it is in his own soul. Where the unlived feminine has been waiting, demanding recognition, his obsession with you is really his obsession with the part of himself he cannot yet embrace. And so, he clings to you, hoping you will complete him, hoping you will soothe the storm. But every woman who understands this knows, completion is never given, it is earned. You can almost see the archetypes playing out. When he asks too many questions about your silence, he becomes the wounded child, terrified of being forgotten. When he elevates you with words of comparison, he becomes the worshipper, kneeling before a goddess who cannot descend into his small cage. When he whispers that you are his possession, he becomes the tyrant, gripped by fear that your freedom will expose his inadequacy. 3 faces, 3 masks, all belonging to the same fractured man. Each one reveals not strength, but weakness, disguised as intensity. And here lies the crucial point. If you do not see these masks for what they are, you risk stepping into his unconscious roleplay. You risk mistaking obsession for love, intensity for devotion, control for care, Many women fall into this trap because obsession often feels flattering. There is a certain thrill in hearing that you are unlike any other, that you are the center of his universe, that he cannot imagine life without you. It strokes the ego, it awakens the romantic in you. But beneath the surface, something far more dangerous is brewing. The erasure of your individuality, the reduction of your spirit to an archetype he cannot live without. And once you surrender to that role, you lose yourself. You become not a woman, but a projection. Your silence no longer belongs to you, it belongs to his fear. Your uniqueness is no longer yours. It is the pedestal upon which he places his anima. Your freedom is no longer sacred, it is the chain he dreads will break. To fall into this is to abandon your sovereignty, and sovereignty is the lifeblood of the empowered feminine. The Stoics warned against this very trap. Marcus Aurelius wrote that a man is disturbed not by events, but by his judgments about them. The obsessed man judges your absence as rejection, your individuality as threat, your freedom as betrayal. His turmoil is not about you, it is about how his own mind distorts reality. And if you are wise, you will not take on his distortions as your burden. You will let him carry them, as he must, until he learns that no woman can save him from his own shadow. But here's the paradox. Your refusal to play the role is often what ignites his deepest confrontation. When you do not bend to his questions, he faces the abyss of his own insecurity. When you do not swell with pride at his comparisons, he confronts the emptiness of projection. When you do not collapse under his possession, he is forced to wrestle with his lack of control. And in this crucible, one of two things happens. Either he spirals deeper into obsession, or he begins the work of individuation, the journey Jung called the reconciliation of the unconscious with the conscious self. Your role, however, is not to fix him, nor to rescue him from this battle. It is simply to remain rooted in your own worth, untouchable by the storm of his words. Because when you are sovereign, his obsession cannot consume you. You hear his phrases not as spells, but as signals. You recognize them not as devotion, but as confession. And you, standing tall in this recognition, become the mirror that forces him to see himself clearly whether he chooses to or not. The truth is this: obsession is his wound, not your crown. It is his shadow, not your prize. And when you understand this, you are no longer flattered by the intensity of his words. You are freed from their illusion. You know that the feminine does not exist to be possessed, worshipped, or interrogated. She exists to be, to flow, to embody her essence without justification. To know this is to step into the rare air of feminine mastery. And when you stand there, no man's obsession can diminish you. Instead, it only reveals the depth of your power, the power to awaken his shadow, not by force, but simply by being who you are. There is a hidden truth that few dare to acknowledge. A man's obsession is never about the woman herself, but about the pieces of his own psyche that she awakens. His language, though directed outward, circles back to his own unconscious. Every word is a projection, every phrase a veil over his deeper wounds, and in those moments when he blurts out, "You're mine," or "No one has ever made me feel this way," he is not describing reality, he is confessing the turmoil of his inner world. To the woman who listens with discernment, these words sound not like romance, but like echoes from the cave of his shadow. Carl Jung insisted that what is not made conscious returns as fate. For the man who refuses to meet his anima within himself, fate appears in the form of a woman who embodies everything he lacks. She becomes his muse, his torment, his obsession. He latches onto her as if she holds the key to his salvation. And so his words spill out with urgency, dripping with the fear of loss. In truth, he is not afraid of losing her. He is afraid of losing the fragment of his soul he sees reflected in her. But this is where the woman must awaken. To believe his words at face value is to step into his unfinished story. It is to carry the weight of his unlived life, to become the caretaker of his shadow. And yet, how many women have mistaken these phrases for proof of devotion? How many have confused obsession with passion, possession with loyalty, projection with intimacy? It is here that the feminine must learn to see through the fog. The obsessed man is both fascinating and fragile. His intensity makes him magnetic, but it is the magnetism of desperation, not of grounded strength. When he demands to know where you've been, it is not your absence that wounds him, but the reminder of his own emptiness. When he swears that you are unlike anyone else, it is not your uniqueness he sees, but the dream of wholeness he cannot find within. When he insists that you belong to him, it is not love, but fear, that speaks the fear of being unmoored, of confronting a life where he is not in control. And yet, paradoxically, this very fragility is what pulls so many women into his orbit. They feel the pull of his intensity and mistake it for depth. They hear the trembling in his voice and imagine it as evidence of love. But love does not shackle, and love does not consume. Love expands, while obsession contracts. Love respects absence, while obsession fears it. Love honors freedom, while obsession seeks to bind. This distinction must be carved into the feminine psyche, like scripture, so that no woman is fooled by words that are heavy with shadow. The philosophers knew this long before modern psychology. Epictetus warned against confusing external things for possessions of the soul. He taught that what is not ours cannot be clung to without pain. The obsessed man violates this wisdom every time he speaks. He grasps at you as though you are his property, as though you could fill his void. But in reality, no woman can fill what he refuses to face within himself. To believe otherwise is to be dragged into his storm, losing your own clarity in the process. The task then is not to silence him, nor to battle his words, but to remain unmoved by them, to listen with awareness, and in that awareness, refuse to be captured. This does not mean you grow cold. It means you grow sovereign. Sovereignty is the shield of the awakened feminine. It is the calm presence that does not bend under the weight of another's need. It is the strength to love without losing yourself, to hear without absorbing, to witness without being consumed. When you embody this sovereignty, something extraordinary happens. His words, once heavy with power, lose their grip on you. They no longer dictate your emotions or cloud your judgment. Instead, they reveal themselves for what they are, the cries of a man caught in his own inner labyrinth. You become the mirror that reflects his struggle back to him, not by force, but by being unshaken. And in that reflection he is confronted with the truth. His obsession is not your burden, but his own unfinished work. Some men, when faced with this mirror, will recoil. They will retreat deeper into projection, perhaps even resent the woman who refuses to play the role of savior. But others, rare courageous souls, will take the invitation. They will confront the shadow, face their anima, and begin the journey of individuation. They will learn that no woman can complete them, because completion comes from within. And here lies the beauty of it. By refusing to be consumed by his obsession, you grant him the chance to grow. By holding your ground, you force him to see what he has avoided. Whether he rises to meet that challenge is not your responsibility. Your only task is to remain whole, to remain free, to remain aligned with the truth that your worth does not hinge on the intensity of his words. This truth is liberation. It is the recognition that obsession is not proof of value, but proof of his unfinished work. It is the wisdom to know that a woman's power is not in being worshipped or possessed, but in being unshakably herself. There comes a moment when the veil finally lifts, and what once felt intoxicating now reveals its true shape. The obsessed man's phrases, once dripping with heat, begin to sound hollow to the woman who has awakened. She realizes that every "you're mine" is not a crown placed on her head, but a chain hidden in velvet. Every "no one has ever made me feel this way" is not a celebration of her uniqueness, but a confession of his incompleteness. Every desperate "where were you" is not born of love, but of fear, the primitive dread of abandonment that lingers like a scar in his nervous system. Carl Jung would tell us that obsession is the shadow's trap, a projection that disguises itself as destiny. A man ensnared by it is not meeting the woman before him. He is grappling with his own unconscious anima, clumsily trying to hold her in place by attaching her image to a flesh-and-blood woman. In truth, he is in dialogue with his own soul, but he does not yet know it, and so his words spill outward, demanding, praising, possessing, as though the answer lies in conquering her. But the awakened feminine knows she is not his cure, and she is not his cage. This is where the woman must step into her deepest power, the power of detachment. Detachment is not coldness, it is clarity. It is the refusal to let another's projections dictate the course of your heart. When you hear these words, you do not fall into their spell, because you recognize them as symbols of his unfinished battle. You listen, but you do not bend. You witness, but you do not absorb. You remain sovereign, and in your sovereignty you become untouchable. The Stoics spoke of this inner fortress often. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the mind becomes invincible when it refuses to tie its peace to the whims of others. This wisdom is the shield of the feminine in the face of obsession. For the obsessed man will try, whether consciously or not, to draw you into a storm, to make you the axis of his spinning world. But the woman who has done her shadow work, who knows her worth, will not enter that vortex. She does not chase validation in his words, nor does she confuse his intensity with truth. Instead, she stands at the center of her own being, unmoved, radiant, whole. And something remarkable happens here. The obsessed man, confronted with a woman who cannot be possessed, is forced to confront himself. His phrases, once weapons of seduction or control, fall flat against her clarity. He realizes that his projection cannot bind her, that his comparisons cannot enthrone her, that his possessiveness cannot cage her. And in that collapse, he is presented with a choice. Either he spirals deeper into denial, or he turns inward and begins the difficult path of individuation. For the woman, however, the outcome is not her burden. She does not measure her worth by his growth, nor her identity by his obsession. Her task is singular: to remain true to herself, to remain free, to remain aligned with her own essence. And in doing so, she discovers the liberation that so many seek, but so few find: the liberation of no longer needing a man's obsession to feel valuable. This liberation is rebirth. It is the shedding of the old pattern where women confuse possession for love. It is the breaking of chains that have bound the feminine to roles of muse, savior, or captive. It is the realization that her worth is not heightened by being obsessed over, but by being unshakably herself. And from this place of freedom, she can finally see obsession for what it truly is: a mirror. a mirror of his inner chaos, a reflection of his unmet shadow, a sign of where he has not yet healed. It is not a gift, not a compliment, not a proof of her power. It is simply his work to do. And in refusing to carry that burden, she honors both herself and him, because she allows him the space to grow or to fail, but on his own terms. The woman who knows this truth becomes untouchable by words. She no longer needs to decode them, nor does she fear them. She simply understands them. And in that understanding, she is free. Free to choose, free to walk, free to love without being chained. And so, the story comes full circle. What began as 3 simple phrases, the questions, the comparisons, the claims of possession, unveils itself as the language of obsession. They are not declarations of love, but revelations of shadow. They are not about her, but about him. And the woman who knows this truth, who feels it in her bones, no longer trembles before those words. She smiles, calm and untouchable, for she has remembered her power. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.